Hi, my name is Richard Azerga from Microsoft, and several months ago I created a blog post on how to build a native iOS app that connected into Office 365. Now at the time, the only libraries that were there to help me were related to authentication. So I could use the Azure Active Directory authentication libraries, or ADAL, to be able to go and authenticate, but all of my calls into Office 365 were done using pure REST. Now, in a native iOS app, REST isn't near as easy to work with as it might be in something like JavaScript. So I'm going to have to do complex things to parse out the JSON data that comes back from one of those REST endpoints in Office 365. Well, since that time, Microsoft has released a SDK for working with Office 365. So I'm going to be able to work with strongly typed classes to be able to go and work with things like files and contacts and calendar events. And so what I thought I'd do is a new iteration of how to build a native app. Now, one of the things that I chose to do in the original post was build my app using the Swift programming language in Xcode. Most, I would say, iOS developers have really come from the Objective-C space, but Swift is Apple's new language, and there's not a lot of documentation out there to help you use it. And so that's really why I chose that language. And I'm going to stick to that in this post. So we're going to look at how to use the Office 365 SDK inside a native iOS app using Swift. So I thought I'd first start by showing a completed solution and what this looks like. And then we can go in and look at how to set up all the various references so we can do that in a brand new project. So one of the things I'll do here really quickly is let me reset my iOS simulator. And what this will do is basically force me to have to log in the first time. One of the great things about the SDKs, both the Active Directory authentication libraries with Azure and the Office 365 SDKs, it's going to handle a lot of that login process and storing, caching things like the refresh token so I don't have to log in every time. But I want to show you the first time in what that experience is like. So let me go ahead and play my app here. Go ahead and start it. And that'll launch my simulator. And what it's going to do, it's going to say, hey, you're not logged in, so you need to go ahead and provide some credentials. So I'll go ahead and log in as one of my demo users here. And once I log in, I've already authorized the app, so it's immediately going to come back and query Office 365 using the SDK. And I'll show you some of the key code that performs those queries. So right now it's actually going out and looking for this user's files that are out in OneDrive. Now this sample app that I'm going to provide is what I call OneDrive images, and it basically looks for images that you have in your OneDrive. So you can see that I might have actually a lot more files than what's displaying here because it's filtering out anything that's not an image. But I can drill down into, deeper into this. If I wanted to go to this pics folder, it'll go query for that one folder, and you can see it brings back all the different images for that folder. And I can even go and click on an image and be able to bring that up. There's a few little tweaks I'm working with around how long it takes the data to load in the image display. So if I click on this, it'll actually come back, and then it'll take a second for it to actually display a picture. So it'll be a white screen for a little bit. That's just a little bug that I'm working through. But the idea is that here I'm actually performing all these operations using strongly typed classes and not necessarily doing REST where I have to parse through the JSON that comes back. And if you've worked with any of the Office 365 APIs, one of the great things you'll find is that we're going to make it very similar for working in this SDK for iOS as we would some of the other ones. So let me go ahead and I'll stop this, and we'll just look at some of the key things that we're doing within this app. So I'm in my controller right now, my My Files controller. And one of the things that we're doing in the My Files controller is we're doing an ensure SharePoint client created. And you'll probably find this in a lot of our sample applications that we have out on GitHub. And the idea is that, instead of me having to go through and write a bunch of code to call out to the discovery service and create a SharePoint client object, it's kind of a nice pattern to put that into a single function that we can call every time, and it can just handle all that stuff for us. So if for some reason I needed to go through a login process, again, that handles all of it. So all this is really doing is it's first making a call out to the discovery service. I'm getting an access token for the discovery service. I'm calling into the discovery service using a discovery client, and then I'm basically looping through all the results that come back from the discovery service and looking for my files. Once I find the my files resource, I'm going to use that to create a SharePoint client object. And basically all what's going on here is it's going through getting a resource specific access token and then creating that SharePoint client. And so there's that SharePoint client that's getting created. Once I have this ensure SharePoint client created function, actually calling in to SharePoint is very, very easy. So this is something I would see this block of code is something you could copy to almost any Office 365 native app you were building, and then actually making the calls are quite simple. So I'll come down here, for instance, where I'm getting a file. Here's get file contents. I basically do the ensure SharePoint client created, and I just do one quick check to make sure that it doesn't come back as null. That's an important check here because it is a nullable object. And once it comes back, if it comes back good, then I can simply say SharePoint client get files, get by ID. I cast it as a file, and then I just get the content. So this line should look very similar to what you've seen using some of our other SDKs for Office 365. Getting like all files, same kind of pattern here. I'll do a SharePoint client, get files, and then do a read. Or if I wanted to get a specific file, I can do get files, get by ID, I cast it as a folder, and then get the children of it. So the sample here that I'm going to upload will have lots of really good examples that you can go and look at on how to work with the SDK. So what I want to do is actually show you how to do this from scratch. How do I get all of the references? Because especially for a Swift project, it can be a little bit odd. So what I'm going to do is just come out here and we're going to create a brand new project. So I'll just do a new project. And I'm going to just call this a single view application. There's lots of different types of applications that I could choose from. And I'm going to call this the O365 demo app. And here's where I can select my language. If I wanted to go Objective-C, again, I'm going to go with Swift, and we'll go ahead and click Next. I'm going to put it in my projects folder, and we should be good to go. So here's my kind of blank project. There's nothing really going on here. If I were to play it, it would just be a blank screen. But what I want to do is start bringing in some of the references to ADAL and our new Office 365 SDK for iOS. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a folder to put some of my references in. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create a new group, which is what they call a folder in here. So we'll call this framework. And that's where I can go and put all of my references that we're going to have to ADAL and the Office 365 SDK. The next thing that I need to do is actually compile those libraries that I'm going to work with, whether it be a library or a framework that I'm going to use in here. And so I actually already have those open. Both the ADAL for iOS and the Office 365 SDK for iOS is available out on GitHub. So you can clone that project, pull down a copy of it, and be able to just compile that. So here's ADAL iOS, and what I can simply do is come over to project and say product and say build. And this is going to go build that, that static library in this case. So that's what we're going to get here with ADAL. So if I wanted to go and grab that static library, I can simply come over to my file and say project settings, and it'll show me the build location where all of the files are going to get compiled to. So I can simply open this here, and you can see I have this derived data. I can find my ADAL iOS and be able to go and locate that specific build. So here is the static library that I'm going to work with. So actually, let me go and add reference to this. So I'm going to go back over to Xcode and go to our brand new project, which is our O365 demo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop that .a file, which is a static library, into our project here. So I'll just go and drag this under frameworks. And when it comes over here, you want to make sure you check the checkbox to copy the item. You want to bring a copy of it to this project. So I'm going to go ahead and say finish. And so now I have our static library. For static libraries, you also need to bring over the header files. So we're going to see that the Office 365 SDK is a little bit different. It's going to compile as a framework, which is going to automatically bring the header files over. But for these static libraries, the .a that ADAL gives you, you're going to bring over the header files. So you can see the header files are in here as well. So I'll simply grab these, and I'm just going to put them all the way at the root. And again, I can copy those, make sure I copy them into my new project. So there we go. We have all that. The last thing that I need to do is there are a couple of storyboards, and if you're new to iOS development, a storyboard is kind of where you build your user interface. And these storyboards are going to be specifically for building basically the login form that we're going to launch, that consistent login form when a user isn't signed in to Office 365, so that you don't have to build a login form or build all those redirects that occur. So I'm going to go back to my Finder here, and I'm going to go to my projects folder and find that ADAL project. And inside of here, I can see here are my two storyboards. So I'm gonna basically select both of these, and I'm gonna basically drag and drop these into supporting files. So there they are. They're in my supporting files folder now that I say okay. And now those storyboards are ready to be used. Now, one of the things that's really key, now that I've actually started to bring some of these other references into this project that uses Swift, is that these were actually built, the ADAL library and the frameworks that we're going to use with the Office 365 SDK, they were built in Objective-C. And in order for us to use these Objective-C references, we need to add what's called a bridging header. And so what I'm going to do is come to supporting files, and I'm going to go out and create a new file that's a .h. It's a header file. So I'm going to create this header file that we'll call bridging header. And that bridging header file is basically going to allow us to reference in our ADAL library. So if you saw my first post on this is basically the exact same thing we did before, but I'm going to basically do an import of that library. And so what I'm going to do is it's AD authentication context .h. So we're going to pull in that AD authentication context.h as a reference, and then that might reference other things, but ultimately that's all we need to do to start referencing those external libraries, that static library. The next thing that I need to do is I need to tell my project about that bridging header file. So I'm going to come over, click on the project itself, and go under build settings. And at the very, very bottom of build settings, there is a section called Swift Compiler Code Generation. And what I want to do is I want to specify my bridging header in here. And what it's going to be is I want to specify it. It's going to be the name of the project, so O365 demo, and then a slash and the bridging header file. So we'll put bridging header.h. And so now our project knows about that header, and it can reference what it needs to. There's one other thing that I need to do in these build settings is up here under believe it's under linking. So let's find the linking group. Packaging, here we go, linking. One of the things that I need to do is under other linking flags. So right here under other linking flags, I need to add a -objc. So we need to tell it that is a linking flag that it's going to be able to leverage things like Objective-C. So we'll go ahead and say OK on that. And now I think we should be good to build our ADAL library. So let's just go and do a quick test here. We'll do a build and see if we are successful compiling that includes our Objective-C code that's in that static library. And it was good. So we're good to go so far. The next thing we need to do is bring in the Office 365 SDK so that we're actually leveraging that. And so what I'm going to do is, again, I have that up as well. So under Office 365 services, here you can see the Office 365 SDK for iOS that I cloned from GitHub. And so what I would do here is I'd simply come up and again I would do a build just to make sure I get a successful build of this. And then I could go back to where my derived data was, where all of my builds are. And what I should find is I have my Office 365 SDKs here. So I'm going to go ahead and locate inside of here where I have my framework files. So again, the key difference here is with ADAL, you're going to have static libraries, which means you have to also copy your headers over. The great thing here is that I'm going to be able to, with the Office 365 SDK, it builds them as frameworks, which includes the headers. So I will simply, let's come over here to, let's go back to Xcode and find our new project. So we'll go over here to Office 365 demo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag those framework files, the ones that I want to use, into my frameworks folder. And so there's a number of different SDK frameworks that are available. They've kind of separated them into units. So I have things like a framework for discovery. I have a framework for working with files, for working with Exchange, for working with Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. So there's a directory one here. And then there's kind of a base one that you're always going to leverage, which basically helps make some of the calls into get OData. So these are really wrappers on top of REST. So if you think about what I did in the first post, I was calling pure REST, but I had to parse out that JSON that comes back into objects. And this is going to do all that for us. So we certainly want that OData base framework, but we're also going to use maybe the discovery service and files. So we'll pull these over and I'll simply just drag and drop them. Again, make sure you do the copy items because we don't want to just reference back to the one that's in that library. I'll go ahead and say finish. And so now they're in here. There's a few additional steps that I need to do. One is related to our bridging header because these frameworks were also built using Objective-C. In fact, if we were to expand these, what you'll see is here's the headers, the Objective-C header files for everything that's in that framework. And so we need to make sure we reference those accordingly in our bridging header. So if we go back to our bridging header, we're going to add a couple of more imports. These are going to look a little bit different compared to a static library. So these are going to be inside brackets, and we're going to say Office 365 underscore OData underscore base, and then it'll have a slash, and we're going to reference the same folder name with a .h. And we could actually find that if we wanted to. So if you expand the actual framework, underneath the headers, you should be able to find that reference. And here it is right here. It's this O365 OData base. So anyway, we're starting to kind of get this all pulled together. So the next thing we're going to do is add a couple more that are in here. And I'll just do a copy and paste and just do a correction on it. So we're going to do the OData base. We're also going to do files. So let's just see how that, it's files underscore SDK. So we'll do files underscore SDK. And again, it's going to match, our header is going to match that. So we'll come over and update this. And then our last one that we're going to reference is discovery SDK. So discovery underscore SDK. And again, these are just the same names as the frameworks themselves. So I think that's good. There's one additional step, and that's back on the project settings. So again, click on the project, and under the General tab, at the bottom, there's an area to reference embedded binaries. And so we're going to add those frameworks as embedded binaries. And you can see when you click on add, you'll see all three of them here. So I'm going to go ahead and add these. And now it should compile. We should be in a good state to where everything compiles, and we should be able to just start using everything now. So let's go ahead and try that. We'll do a product and do a build. And it looks like we had an error. So let's see. Looks like one of these wasn't found. Oh, I'm missing an S. So I said file instead of file. So let's fix our bridging header here really quickly. Go back to here and make sure it's files, plural. And let's try this one more time. Let's do another build. And our build succeeded. So you can see that's basically the steps that need to be in place in order to reference both ADAL and the Office 365 SDK for iOS. So at this point, you could start kind of doing all the logic for the different view controllers that you might have within your application, and you can build some great Office 365 native apps for iOS. So certainly look at the rest of the blog, because I'm going to go into more detail around the ensure SharePoint client created and how I'm making some actual calls using the SDK. And then, download the sample and start playing. Let me know if you have any questions, but the Office 365 SDK is great, and you can use it to really start building native applications quickly for iOS. Thanks.